Good morning. I hope you and your families are well. Right immediately after reciting Baruch Sha'amar in Nusach Ashkenaz, we recite the Hodu. These prakim are prakim, psukim, which appear both in Tehillim and in Divrei Hayamim with minimal differences. The nusach that we recite are the psukim from Divrei Hayamim as opposed to Tehillim. But in fact, we know that many have the minhag to recite these psukim prior to Baruch Sha'amar. And that itself could be very insightful. Why do some recite this before Baruch Sha'amar? Because it seems that these psukim are a part of Psukei de Zimra, which are really more associated with the recitation of Karbanos, more than the other psukim of Psukei de Zimra. And if we take a look at the history of how this evolved, that Klal Yisrael recites these prakim of Divrei Hayamim, the Hodu, we could understand why it is that they are so closely linked to the Karbanos in particular. These psukim, when was the first time that Klal Yisrael recited these psukim? So in fact, these psukim, the Navi tells us, both in Divrei Hayamim and in Tehillim, was a shira that David HaMelech gave to the Leviim to sing in front of the Aron. When? Not in the Mishkan and not in the Beis HaMikdash. But we know that when Mishkan Shiloh was destroyed by the Plishtim captured the Aron, and they took the Aron with them. Now, after the Plishtim captured the Aron, there were 7 months where the Rebbeinu Shalom struck them with different types of suffering. Due to this suffering, the Plishtim decided to return the Aron to Klal Yisrael. David HaMelech, interestingly enough, does not take the Aron and bring it to where the Mishkan is, either in Nov and then subsequently in Givon, but rather David HaMelech brings the Aron to Yerushalayim. Now, in front of the Aron, while the Aron is in Yerushalayim, returning the Aron to Yerushalayim, David HaMelech composes these psukim, this shira, to be sung in front of the Aron in Yerushalayim. Now remember, the Aron is not in the Mishkan. There is a Mishkan which exists in Nov and then in Givon, and the Aron is in Yerushalayim. This is the song which the Leviim sang as the Aron was being brought resting to rest in its final place of resting in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. But not only that, David HaMelech instructed that until Shlomo HaMelech builds the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, while the Aron is there, but without a home. So there would be karbanos, a tamid shel shachar and a tamid shel bein arbayim, brought in front of this Aron, and accompanying those karbanos would be the shira of Hodu. So that means that this shira of Hodu, this song of Hodu, which is given to us in Divrei Yamim and then recorded again in Tehillim, this shira actually accompanied the tamid shel shachar and tamid shel bein arbayim, but not in Mishkan, not in Beis HaMikdash, but rather when the Aron was by itself. And therefore, the minhag developed that we, immediately after reciting Karbanos, we go into reciting Hodu, which is the shira which would accompany the Karbanos. So when we recite the Karbanos, which is Unishalma Parim Sifasenu, we recite the shira which would accompany the Karbanos. And that's why Nusach Sfard, in fact, the Hodu is prior to Baruch Shamar, because it's really more associated with the Karbanos. Nusach Ashkenaz agrees that it's very associated with Karbanos, but at the end of the day, it is Shiras V'Sishbachos to the Rebbeinu Shalom. So why not say it after we've made the bracha of Baruch Sha'amar, which is the bracha on being able to praise the Rebbeinu Shalom. So now we have to ask ourselves, now that we understand the background for these psukim and how it eventually came to be, the recitation of these psukim, and that they were originally instituted for the Aron coming back to Yerushalayim and the Hakravas, Hakarbanos, we have to ask ourselves the obvious question. Why would we take these psukim, this shira, and memorialize it for all time? You know, the Talmud was brought in Beis HaMikdash as well, and a different shira was sang. The Talmud was brought in the Mishkan prior to the Aron being in Yerushalayim, and other shira, other psukim were sung by Klal Yisrael. Why was it that Minhag Yisrael decided that Klal Yisrael, after citing Karbanis, is going to sing Shira, like all Karbanis have Shira associated with him. But which Shira are we going to choose? Specifically the Shira of when the Aron was alone, almost without a home, when the Aron was brought to Yerushalayim, and then ultimately until the Shlomo Melech builds Beit HaBechir. And I believe that if you take a look at the content of this Shira, it becomes clear what David HaMelech's emotions were and what his intentions were when composing this tefillah. If you look at the content, look at the nature of the psukim, beautiful, beautiful psukim. These psukim describe Klal Yisrael's destiny. They begin with Hodu Lashem. They begin with Klal Yisrael singing to the Ribono Shel Olam, Hodu Hashem Kiru B'Shmoi. But not just regular praise to the Ribono Shel Olam. They discuss the specific role of Klal Yisrael amongst the Umos HaOlam to train the Umos HaOlam to see the hand of God and to be able to praise the hand of God. After David HaMelech sees the tremendous Kiddush Hashem, that the Plishtim were willing to give back the Aron because they realized that the Aron in their midst, it doesn't belong and is causing tremendous suffering. Could there be a greater Kiddush Hashem? Is there a greater expression? Sichu b'chol neflos, that the Klal Yisrael could point to the Ribono Shel Olam's hand and say, you see who's controlling the world? That was a tremendous expression where the Umos HaOlam came to recognize the hand of the Ribono Shel Olam. And now the Aron, in light of that, on the heels of that, is being brought to Yerushalayim. David HaMelech saw the destiny of Klal Yisrael coming to fruition. He saw the destiny of Avram Avinu on Hara Moriah well before, 1,000 years before he brings the Aron. Avram Avinu was on Hara Moriah with bringing a carbon of Yitzchak, and everything that happened subsequently is just to bring and close the circle to this point in time, said David HaMelech. David HaMelech says, don't for a moment think that this is in a vacuum, that we're living in a vacuum, that we are living independent of the great people that came before us. David HaMelech takes us back through a journey through Jewish history, telling us that this started already from Avram Avinu, Asher Karases Avraham Ushvuasoi LeYitzchak, V'Yamidel LeYaakov LeChoik LeYisrael B'Yisrael, bringing us from Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Leimer Lecha Etein Eretz Canaan, the Bris Bein HaBesarim. Of course, Vayishalchu Migoy El Gol, we were a wandering nation. Umi Mamlechol Amacher, Lo Hiniach LeIsh LeYishkam V'Yoichach Aleim Melachim. And then Al Tigu B'Mashiachai, referring to Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu is never referred to Mashiach Hashem. We know who's referred to as Mashiach Hashem, David HaMelech. It's as if David HaMelech is saying over here, this moment of bringing the Aron Kodesh back to Yerushalayim is the fruition of all the work of generations, starting from Avram Avinu, where he planted the seeds of Klal Yisrael, and everything our nation has experienced. It's all coming and leading up to this moment of where I lay the Aron in Yerushalayim. So I am giving my title of Mashiach Hashem, says David HaMelech, and I'm going to bestow it upon Avraham Avinu. The role of these psukim is to help Klal Yisrael realize that our history is a circle. Our history is a process. We don't live in a vacuum, but every generation builds upon the generation before and leads up to the generation that will come. And we play an important role in that process. And every generation, no matter where they are, has to understand that they're playing a role in that process of bringing Klal Yisrael to a day where ultimately they will be able to show all the Umois HaOlam, Sichu B'chol Nefloisav, to see the tremendous, tremendous power and tremendous action of the Ribono Shel Olam. So Klal Yisrael's minhag is that in Golus, which very often presents difficult times, very often presents difficult challenges, we recite the psukim of Hodu, those specific psukim, not the psukim that would accompany the karbanos in Beis HaMikdash, not to the psukim that would accompany the karbanos in the Mishkan, but the psukim that would accompany the karbanos when the Aron was just laid in Yerushalayim. Almost at that point where David HaMelech sees the circle coming to a close. We're not there yet. Shlomo HaMelech has not built the Beis HaMikdash, but it was already at a point where David HaMelech understood that we see the bigger picture. We're able to see the bigger picture. We're able to see how this is going to lead to an entire world being Koirei B'Shem Hashem. And that's important for Klal Yisrael to realize. When we don't have Beis HaMikdash, when we don't have a Mishkan, and all we rely on is Unishalma Parim Sifaseinu, the recitation of Karbanos. We're going to recite the Shira of the Karbanos that were brought, not in Beis HaMikdash, when the circle's already closed, and not in the Mishkan, when the Rebbeinu Shalom has a place to live in this world. But before we get to that place, where the Aron is still wandering, where Klal Yisrael still has not found their exact place, but we remember David HaMelech bringing the Aron to Yerushalayim and being able to proclaim, finally I see that the picture, the circle is going to close. It may take another couple of decades till Shlomo HaMelech comes, but I see the direction that we're headed. I see that this entire process was for a greater purpose. And that's what Klal Yisrael has to remember in Gullus, right after we recite the Karbanos. And it pains us that we're not able to bring Karbanos. Remind ourselves that we're headed in a certain direction. And once again, there will be real karbanos. There will be a real Beis HaMikdash. And those karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash will be able to be accompanied by other shiras v'sishbachas, when things are clearer, when Hashras HaShechina is clearer. But until then, we're going to continue reciting the Hodu, understanding and appreciating that we're part of this great process that Klal Yisrael is taking the world through. And we are going to understand and appreciate that our role is to make sure that the greater world is able to experience the hand of God and bring that process to its complete fruition. I wish you all a good day.